Assuming that we believe that we live within God, what prevents us from feeling Him or communicating with Him? My hypothesis is, especially for believers, that the difficulty to recognize and communicate with God implies a sort of spiritual autism. Hello, how are you, fellow seekers? You can call me either Javi or Dr. Rubio. I prefer just Javi. I'm a PhD in cellular and molecular biology and somehow weird guy for some people because apart from being a scientist, I'm a believer. I'm convinced that science and faith are branches of the same tree and both seek the truth behind things, visible and invisible. When we want to test a hypothesis through experiments, we use scientific method. I want to share with you that life is the best lab where we can test our hypothesis and get evidence to convince us of what we believe in. Today, we are still within the framework of the hypothesis that I developed in the episode 6. I live within God. Last week, we explored the question, what prevents us from believing in God? Let's talk today about the next question. Assuming that we believe that we live within God, what prevents us from feeling Him or communicating with Him? My hypothesis is, especially for believers, that the difficulty to recognize and communicate with God implies a sort of spiritual autism, which can have different degrees of manifestation. We have several friends who have children with some degree of autism. One of the parents recognized how difficult it is for him to see that his son does not respond to his gesture of love. It is hard when you hug your child and you do not know what your child feels, he says. I have thought about this in terms of God. If He is like a father or a mother, how does He feel when we don't respond to His gestures of love? Autism spectrum disorder is a condition related to brain development that has many causes. Although each case of autism is very particular, they have a common symptom: difficulties in understanding other people's feelings and in talking about their own feelings. This manifests itself in a communication problem that prevents them from interacting naturally and socializing with other people, making friends, for example. For many years I lived believing in God, but most of the time I did not feel Him. I prayed to Him and asked Him, like, let me pass this exam and let me get better grades than my classmates. A bit selfish, my request. But to me, He was in heaven and I was here feeling abandoned on earth, living like the TV show Alone, where people are taken to an island and they are separated to see how long they can survive on their own. Back then, my image of God was very different from a mother who carries you in her womb and takes care of you. God was for me heaven, and I needed to learn how to survive myself here on earth. Talking about surviving, we can see that there is a big difference between the last three generations: grandparents, parents, and children. My maternal grandpa was a shepherd. He tended to sheep for a living. He wanted to have breakfast. He had to get the milk from the sheep, bring it to the grandma to boil it, and consume it that same day because they had no refrigerator. I remember as a child going to my neighbor who had cows to buy milk in a metal bottle, We boil it and refrigerate any leftovers for no more than 3 days. Now, my children, while they know that the milk comes from the cow, they say in the morning, "Make me my milk." I reply to them, "The cow makes the milk." They have only seen milk in the box ready to drink. The same thing with the clothes. Grandparents used to knit and make their own, and it took days to finish a sweater or pair of pants. Now you can buy online from your phone, and it will arrive the next day, and if it doesn't fit, you return it. My grandparents and my parents wrote letters to each other and await them with expectation. They sat quietly to read them. They kept them as a treasure. Now most of us use messenger apps to communicate, and we can develop ability to be in multiple conversation at the same time while doing something else, and then we forget to continue the conversation. When I was a child, friends would come to your house or to play in the street. Now friends usually in Snapchat, Facebook. Why do I say this? Because my grandparents' generation was aware that everything had a cost in effort, time, and resources. They thank God every day for being alive and healthy, having work and bread on the table, because sometimes all they had to eat was potato skins. Now my children's generation thanks McDonald's, their mom's or dad's credit card, or Amazon, but we don't remember to thank God. It seems that God has nothing to do with it, or has He? We are used to hearing people say, "I have achieved this in my life. I have worked for it, with my sweat and my talent." But is it completely fair to say that? It is true, one has to make an effort. Nothing comes for free, but perhaps it is a partial truth from an autistic perspective, in the sense that we do not recognize who is behind our success. In other words, none of us can extend our life by a single day. We can take our own life, but we cannot be sure that tomorrow we will be alive. Our heart begins to beat with just 6 weeks in the womb and will stop beating one day. We haven't done anything to get the heart beating, and we are doing nothing to keep it beating. We can exercise it healthy, but there are athletes and healthy people who die of causes they cannot prevent. Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 said, "Look at the birds in the sky. They do not sow, nor reap, nor gather in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of much more value than they? And who of you, however eager he may be, can add an hour to the course of his life?" Again, to test the main hypothesis that God takes care of us and we are inside Him, we need a little faith to realize and recognize what He has done for us and continue doing today. I invite you, fellow seeker, to review your last week, your last year, perhaps review your youth, adolescence, your childhood, and review it in the light of these words that can help you get out of that spiritual autism that has prevented you from recognizing God behind everything you have lived. Recognizing God through the people He has by your side, recognizing that all the good that comes out of you comes from Him. Therefore, now do this exercise. Review the moments of your life when you think you have been more alone, abandoned, and take a leap of faith listening to these words addressed to you that are in the book of the prophet Hosea, chapter 11. But when you hear the word Israel, change that word for your name. John, Julia, Ray, Tina. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me. They sacrificed to the Baals and they burned incense to images. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms, but they did not realize it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with ties of love. To them I was like one who leads a little child to the cheek, and I bent down to feed them. To finish, I would like to make reference to the story about the man who is walking with God and leaving 4 footprints on the sand. His life passing before his eyes like in a movie. Looking back, the man asked God why in the most difficult moments of his life he only sees 1 pair of footprints. My dear child, the pair of footprints that you see are mine. It was during those moments that I carried you. If today, when listening to me, any words have reached you, remember it was God through this clumsy donkey that is speaking to you. Open the eyes of faith. It was not me, it is Him that wants to communicate with you. Do you recognize Him? A big hug.